3 days before the wedding, my father said, "I'm not going to walk you down the aisle. Your sister will be upset." My mother hung up. On the wedding day, the doors opened, and I walked in holding the arm of the man my father had pushed out of the family years ago. 3 days before the wedding, my father got on my mother's phone and said, "I'm not going to walk you down the aisle. Your sister will be upset." Then my mother ended the call. I was sitting in my SUV in a Walmart parking lot, the seating chart on the passenger seat, the welcome bags packed in the trunk, and my phone still in my hand while I stared at the screen like maybe it would somehow explain what had just happened. For a second I honestly thought I had heard him wrong. I called back. My mother didn't answer. I texted, "What does that even mean?" 5 minutes later she replied, "Paige is having a hard time. Please don't make this worse." I read that message 3 times. My wedding was 3 days away. Everything was ready. The church was booked, the flowers were paid for, my dress had already been altered, and for months my father had been telling everyone he was going to be the one to walk me down the aisle. And now, suddenly, because my sister was in a bad mood, he was taking it back. Why was Paige upset? Because her boyfriend had left her 2 weeks earlier. That was it. No accident. No illness. No emergency. Just a breakup. But in my family, Paige being upset had always been treated like a national emergency. If she had a headache, dinner plans changed. If someone at work hurt her feelings, the family group chat turned into a support line. If something good happened in my life, somehow the attention always found its way back to her before the day was over. The same thing had happened at my bridal shower. My future mother-in-law had decorated her backyard, my friends had brought gifts, and people had shown up ready to celebrate me. Then Paige came in, started crying about her ex, and my mother spent half the shower in the kitchen comforting her while I opened presents at the table and pretended not to notice. Even then I had told myself to stay quiet. Just make it to the wedding. Just get through the week. That had been my mistake my whole life. I kept thinking that if I stayed patient enough, kind enough, understanding enough, there would eventually be some space left for me too. There never was. I drove straight to my parents' house. I grew up in that quiet Roswell cul-de-sac with 2-car garages, trimmed lawns, front porches, and neighbors who waved while watering their grass on Saturday mornings. When I walked in, my mother was standing by the kitchen island, Paige was sitting on a bar stool with an iced coffee, and my father was near the sink like it was just another regular afternoon. Like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just stepped out of one of the biggest moments of my life. I said, "You're really doing this?" My father didn't even look at me at first. He said, "I'm not walking into that church while your sister is falling apart." "It's my wedding," I said. Paige slowly turned her straw around in her cup and said, "You still get the husband. Why do you need the whole spotlight too?" My mother immediately said, "Paige," in that soft fake way that wasn't meant to stop her. It was just enough so she could say later that she had said something. I looked at my mother and asked, "You're okay with this?" She folded her hands and said, "Honey, be mature. She's fragile right now." "And I'm what?" I asked. No one answered me. Then my father said the sentence that settled everything for me. He looked right at me and said, "If you loved this family, you'd make this easier." That was the moment it all snapped into focus. In my family, love had always meant sacrifice, but somehow it was always my sacrifice. My feelings. My milestones. My plans. My comfort. My place. Something had to be given up to keep the peace. It was always mine. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just stood there looking at the 3 of them, and suddenly years of old memories lined up in my head so clearly it made me sick. When I won debate finals in high school, dinner got turned into comfort for Paige because her cheer tryouts hadn't gone well. When I got my college scholarship, my mother spent that same night calling relatives to talk about what a hard semester Paige was having. When Ben proposed to me, I showed everyone my ring, and 10 minutes later the family group chat was full of photos of Paige's new apartment so both girls could have their moment. And 8 years earlier, when my Uncle Daniel had told the truth about my grandmother's will, my father had pushed him out of the family entirely. The official version had always been that Uncle Daniel was greedy, difficult, and disloyal. The real story was different. My grandmother had divided her property equally. My father wanted to keep the lake cabin for himself. Uncle Daniel refused to lie for him in court. That was all it took. From that day on, my father turned him into the family villain. One version of the story went to church friends, another to cousins, another to neighbors, and after enough repetition most people stopped asking questions. The loudest voice won. I stayed quiet back then too. Maybe out of fear. Maybe because I had already been trained to confuse silence with loyalty. Maybe because some part of me still wanted my father's approval badly enough to overlook what it cost everyone else. But now, 3 days before my wedding, they were taking my place from me too. So I said, fine. Then your guest. That's all. Paige laughed. Actually laughed. You're being dramatic. I didn't even look at her. I walked out, got in my car, sat in the driveway for about 10 seconds and called Ben. He answered on the first ring. I said, "Hi Dad, quit." There was a pause. Then he said calm as ever, "Come home. We'll figure it out." That night, for the first time in years, I said the name no one in my parents' house ever said out loud anymore. Daniel Brooks. My Uncle Daniel. My father's older brother. I still had his number tucked inside an old Christmas card I had never thrown away. I had never called it. Partly because I didn't know what I'd say. Partly because I was scared. Partly because, if I'm being honest, I had let my family convince me that reaching out to him would be some kind of betrayal. That night I found the card, saved the number and called. He answered after 3 rings. "Hello." I said, "It's Nora." There was a brief silence and then he said very softly, "I know your voice." That nearly broke me. I told him everything. Exactly what my father had said. Exactly what my mother had texted. Exactly what Paige had done. I didn't soften any of it. I didn't protect anyone. I just told the truth from beginning to end. When I was done, he asked me one question. "What do you need from me?" And I said, "Will you walk me down the aisle?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. "I'd be honored." If you're still with me, hit like and subscribe, because what I did next was the part nobody in my family saw coming. The next morning I took my wedding back. Before I even finished my coffee, I had sent messages to my wedding planner, the church coordinator, the photographer and the DJ. The subject line on every email was the same. Updated family roles. I wrote everything out clearly. My father would no longer be escorting me. There would be no father-daughter dance. Uncle Daniel would be in the front row. My parents and Paige would be seated in the side section. No relative was to be handed a microphone. Family photos would happen only on my terms. I called the florist and asked them to prepare an extra boutonniere for Uncle Daniel. Then I texted my mother, "Dad will not be walking me. Uncle Daniel will." The family group chat exploded. My mother wrote, "This is cruel." My father wrote, "Do not bring that man into our daughter's wedding." Paige wrote, "You're doing this to hurt me." For the first time in my life, I didn't explain myself. I didn't plead. I didn't soften my words so they could feel comfortable with them. I sent one message. "No. I'm doing this because the person who shows up gets the role." Then I turned my phone face down on the table. Ben read the message and said, "That's exactly right." And that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. 2 of my aunts called me separately. One of them lowered her voice and asked, "Did your daddy really back out because of Paige?" I said, "Yes." That was all I gave her. I didn't campaign against my parents. I didn't send screenshots. I didn't try to embarrass anyone. I just stopped hiding the truth for people who had never once protected mine. And once the truth gets out, it usually knows how to move on its own. By that evening, cousins knew. By the next morning, 2 women from church knew too. My father's biggest power had always been controlling the story first. He would tell his version early with enough confidence and enough moral language around it that everyone else just adjusted around him. This time he never got ahead of it. This time people were already asking the questions he didn't want to answer. If he was such a devoted father, why did he back out 3 days before the wedding? If Uncle Daniel was such a terrible man, why did the bride choose him? That was my revenge. Not shouting. Not destruction. Not public theatrics. Just refusing to keep protecting a lie. The morning of the wedding was bright and hot in that unmistakable Georgia way, where the air already feels thick before noon. The magnolia leaves were shining in the sun, the venue looked almost too pretty to be real, and valet boys in white shirts were jogging around with keys and clipboards. Inside the bridal suite there were curling irons, Starbucks cups, garment bags, hairspray, and the nervous kind of laughter women use when they're trying not to cry before something big. I put on my gown. My veil was pinned in place. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. For the first time all week I felt like myself again. Hurt, yes. Tired, absolutely. But not weak. Not small. Not invisible. Uncle Daniel arrived early in a navy suit, polished shoes, and with a small velvet box in his hand. When he opened it, I saw my grandmother's pearl hairpin inside. It was the same one I used to touch on her dresser when I was little. I had thought it was long gone. He said, "She wanted you to have this when the day came." My stylist slid it into my hair and something inside me settled. Not healed completely. Not magically fixed. But settled. A few minutes before the ceremony, I stood with Uncle Daniel by the back doors of the chapel. Through the small glass panes I could see the front rows filling in. Ben was standing at the altar, steady and calm, exactly like he always was when I needed solid ground. On the left side I saw my parents. My mother's back was straight, like she was trying to hold herself together with pure pride. My father's jaw was tight. Paige had shown up in a dress just a little too close to white because of course she had. But on that day one thing was different. She was not in the center. She was off to the side. Exactly where I had put her. The coordinator gave the signal. The doors opened. I took Uncle Daniel's arm and stepped inside. I felt the reaction move through the room almost instantly. Heads turned row by row. People sat up straighter. Someone near the front let out a small gasp. My father started to stand, then stopped. My mother's face went pale. Paige looked like the ground had shifted under her. I did not look at them again. I looked straight down the aisle at Ben and kept walking. When we reached the altar, Uncle Daniel placed my hand into Ben's and leaned in just enough to say quietly, "You were never hard to love." That one sentence said everything my father never had. The ceremony was beautiful. Short, clean, peaceful. No interruptions. No scene. No one hijacked the day. At the reception the DJ announced, "Now dancing with the man who showed up for her." And I danced with my uncle while the room applauded around us. Some people were crying. Some were stunned. Some were probably replaying years of family stories in their heads and realizing they had believed the wrong person all along. What mattered to me was simple. The truth was standing there in public where no one could edit it anymore. One man had walked away from his role. Another had stepped into it without making me beg. The rest of the revenge happened in details. During family photos the photographer asked, "Bride's immediate family?" I said, "Daniel, Ben, his mom and my girls." My mother took a step forward. I said, "Not this one." She stopped. Later Paige tried to get the DJ to hand her a microphone. He refused exactly the way I had instructed him to. Halfway through the reception my father came over to me and said through clenched teeth, "You've embarrassed this family." I looked him directly in the eye and said, "No." I stopped protecting the lie. That ended the conversation because he knew I was right. The week after the wedding the calls and voicemails came in. My mother said I had divided the family. Paige sent me a long email about her pain, her anxiety, her hard season, and how unsupported she felt, but somehow not one real apology made it into that message. My father called Ben and told him to get me to calm down. Ben told him, "She is calm. That's why this is sticking." After that, I blocked all three of them. Not forever. At least not at first. But for long enough to hear my own life without their noise in it. 2 people from church reached out too, but I didn't explain anything. I didn't need a jury anymore. The photos went online and every important one had Uncle Daniel in it beside me, calm and unmistakable. There was no way to crop him out of what people had already seen. No way to rewrite that moment after the fact. For once, I didn't rescue my parents from the consequences of what they had chosen. I didn't clean up their image. I didn't smooth things over so everyone could pretend we were fine at Christmas. Now there's a framed photo in my living room. The chapel doors are open behind me. I'm in my gown with my hand on Uncle Daniel's arm. The smile on my face is not the old smile I used to wear when I wanted everyone else comfortable. It's the smile of a woman who finally chose herself without apologizing for it. My father said he would not walk me down the aisle because my sister would be upset. Fine. Then I walked in holding the arm of the man he had thrown out of the family years earlier. And the truth is, on that day he did not look like the one outside the family. He looked like the only one who truly belonged there. If you think I did the right thing, leave a like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. And tell me in the comments, if you were in my place would you have taken that same arm and walked through those doors?